Good evening and welcome to the Wildcard Rewind podcast. It is Combine Week, but this week we are going to be reviewing the running back performances of the 2023 season. Let's get into it.
I just want to rewind to when we were young and hard. Back to all those good times. Take me back to the start.
Now, we were joking before we got started that I have a face for radio because we just got a notification that we're recording in high definition this week, which is very exciting to anyone watching. And for some reason, that made me want to do kind of a radio style intro. My sort of good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome into Wildcard Rewind.
It's magic hour. Lights down.
It is magic hour, and I'm in the dark, and it's just me and you today, Paul. How are you doing? How are you going?
I'm doing really well, mate. I had the giggles at the start because, like you said about the HD, I said I was built for HD, and you said you were built for the radio, and it just tickled me. So if anyone can see me laughing at the start, it's because Lewis literally went, "And I'm built for the radio. Record."
It's normally a fun game to play to try and say something stupid right before we start recording to see if you can catch someone in the act. The other behind the scenes peak is that we always do a little warm up dance. And I know from past experience that you and Hannah have tried to catch people out so that it starts recording while we're like midway through a little wave.
I've definitely got Hannah once. Definitely. I wish I remember which show it was because I'm sure she's just like,
just midway through a weird little stretch routine that we do. So it's Combine Week this week, which is obviously very exciting. Starting off on Thursday, although it's not until I think Saturday that the big workouts start happening. Although the Combine is obviously quite an interesting thing because the most important parts of it are the interviews and the medicals that go on behind the scenes, more so than the actual testing numbers. Like, we obviously as a community get very excited when a player goes out there, especially with the 40, goes out and runs very quickly. But in these days of tracking data, and also in kind of the more comprehensive view of analytics that teams will have, they'll have all of this information anyway. So it's obviously very exciting, but it's kind of less impactful than it used to be. Do you think you'll find yourself watching anything from the Combine this week?
no.
No?
No. So last year we had Murph on around sort of this similar time, and no, that was more towards the draft, but he was talking about Anthony Richardson and the Combine and all of this, and he was like, it's basically just a gym session in shorts and t-shirt,
Yeah.
And so I get the Combine, and I get like what they do and why they do it and everything like this, but ultimately I don't like it because, like, when they run the 40, they run it in a really tight vest, really tight shorts, but when they play football, they wear pads and helmets and everything like that. So why not make them run in their pads and helmets?
Yeah.
So I'm sure we spoke about this last year, and I'm sure we're going to speak about it next year when the next Combine comes and everything like this. So to me, it kind of, I prefer to see them do it in full gear,
Yeah.
like you can run really fast, okay, but can you run really fast when you've got a player that's tracking you, or as a wide receiver, or you've got a player stood in front of you as a running back and stuff like this? Or can you run really fast and you've got loads of pads on and everything like that? Let's make it a bit more realistic, and then I'm going to go, oh, okay, he's actually like the real deal.
Yeah, and also like the amount of time that you get sort of, I mean, obviously for a running back or a wide receiver, maybe, but very occasionally that you're running straight line speed and you have the distance, 20 yards to get up to full speed and you're having to pull away from someone. I mean, maybe if you're lucky, 2 or 3 times a game. So it's like, it's not only that it's not a good impression of their ability in like of their actual speed, but it's also not the kind of speed which actually makes a difference. The one I always find myself coming back to is Cooper Cup, which unsurprisingly, the one I come back to is Cooper Cup.
Sure,
So
shock. Let's talk about the Rams players again. Oh, the Rams are the best. You know?
We're going to talk about the Rams staff as well. So the Rams staff don't go to the combine, and that's been a thing for I think the past 3 seasons, that they don't send any staff there because their opinion is, well, we'll get, we're past the days of having to have someone with the timer with the stopwatch in front of them going, yeah, no, that was a 4-3-4. Like, so they'll get all the data anyway, but they have all the data they need. But the Rams have always used, or for the last kind of 5-6 years, used the GPS tracking data from college in terms of actual game speed rather than caring about the 40. So Cooper Cup ran a 4.62 40-yard dash, which is pretty abjectly terrible for a wide receiver. That's, for a deep threat, you're hoping for kind of a 4.3. But for most wide receivers, you're looking at somewhere in the 4.4, 4.5 range. So to run a low 4.6, but still a 4.6 is pretty bad. And Cooper Cup, yeah, he's not a speed threat, but like he's quick. He's still, he's shifty. His game speed vastly outplays his 40 time. But that's the point, that like it doesn't really have any actual correlation to success at the position. I think speaking with Rich Cooling the other day, was saying that like over COVID he did a big deep dive into all of the numbers, and there's basically no correlation, especially at skill positions, between the testing numbers and fancy points per game or fancy finish over a season. So it's good to get people excited about the combine by telling them how kind of useless it is for the NFL.
Yeah, but and I also think the media don't help, because the media will undoubtedly, somebody will not test as well as they should, and all of a sudden they'll go, oh, he hasn't tested as well as he should, and
Yep.
let's make a big thing of this. And then you'll get somebody, what's his name, tight end, the giant tight end, Darnell Washington.
Yeah.
Darnell Washington. Last year
Yeah.
it was like, oh my god, look what he did when he pushed that thing, and it was like, and he made it look like there was nothing there. And they were like, oh my god, this guy's going to be amazing. Look at him. And everyone was like, he's my late sleeper tight end. And he's done nothing, absolutely nothing. He's and so what you'll get from the combine is you'll have, so-and-so. I haven't really looked much into rookies, so please don't put me on any spots or anything with the rookie questions right now. But we're gonna say, Marvin Harris Jr. Okay, he goes there. He's not as quick as they thought he was going to be. He's not as this as, oh God, let's lower him down the board and everything like this. And I don't think any team's going to go, oh, he didn't run a 4.4, he run a 4.5 or something like that. He's not as quick and this, and then there'll be somebody that everyone was completely out on, and he's not going to do much, and he's going to turn up and run a 4.3. He's going to jump this high and everything like this, and they're going to go, oh, he's a freak athlete. Oh, okay, let's all bump him up our boards and everything like that, and then he's not going to be great. So I try not to take too much from the combine.
It's interesting bringing up Marvin Harrison Jr. because it was announced today. So now that we're obviously in the run up 3 days away, we're starting to get announcements about who's testing, what QBs are going to be throwing, who's actually going to be competing in what drills. And Marvin Harrison Jr. has come out and said he's not taking part in any drills. And it's an interesting thing, and it kind of shows the value of the combine at the moment, that what could he possibly, he's being mocked as high as the 3rd overall pick. His floor is 4th overall. Like, he either goes to the Patriots or he goes to the Cardinals. That's it. What could he possibly have to get from performing at the combine and from taking part in the drills? So it's interesting that for him, he could only lose draft status from going out and performing terribly, or from potentially getting injured as well. Like, there's nothing to be gained for these top prospects.
But also, future Cardinals wide receiver Marvin Harris Jr. doesn't need to go there and show that he, to me, like you sort of said with that chat that you had with Rich, he's got nothing to prove. The guy's already proved how good he could be in college football. You know what I mean? He doesn't need to go and do. It's like going, oh, you're a professional athlete. You're a runner. You're Sir Mo Farah. Okay, we want to see how good you are. Here's a bleep test.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I can do that. Oh,
Yeah,
brilliant, brilliant! You must be amazing. Let's put you with the elite guys. And it's like, oh, okay.
we've seen them doing the thing. We've seen them doing the sport already.
You know what I
Um,
mean?
and that's the point, that like the top guys can't really get anything out of it. But where the event is interesting, and I'll come on to another point in a minute, but where the event is interesting is for some of the lower, some of the guys projected to go a bit lower, who can actually kind of show out with athletic testing. And even if it doesn't translate to fancy success, they can make themselves some money at the
Yes,
combine
yes.
by
And
testing to be more
I get
athletically.
that side of it. I do
Yeah.
definitely get that side of it.
So I wanted to think quickly about kind of rookies who could show out, or could be winners or losers. But when I was looking at kind of the athletic side of things, that's less important to me. The two big ones that I wanted to spotlight, one of them being fantasy relevant, and one of them just being the guy that I want the Rams to draft. So Jonathan Brooks, the running back coming out of Texas, who tore his ACL in November. He's actually a lot of people's RB1. Obviously, this is a bit of a strange running back class. That it's relatively deep, but it's just not got any top end talent. But I think the injury status for him, and whether or not he can contribute in his rookie season, tearing our ACL in November, it makes it unlikely. But if his injury status is okay, that could help him quite a lot. The other one is Layatu Latu, who's an edge rusher out of UCLA, who similarly to, I can't remember the name of the player. He had to medically retire a couple of years ago for a neck injury, and then came out of retirement and is now obviously draft eligible, and is he's my edge one. Like, he's a fantastic player, and I'd really like the Rams to like his medical status and other teams to be scared by it. So he goes to us at 19. But that's the kind of thing that actually you can win or lose at the combine, is when they get to have the interviews with you, and when teams get to do, there's something like 100 MRI machines in Indy that they can do all of the scans on you and check your injury status. And that's where a guy can actually win or lose. So I think it'll be interesting for those type of players who can actually kind of gain or lose some draft status because of clubs being able to finally get their time alone with them and figure out for themselves, get their own kind of evaluation on their medicals. The other thing which I think is interesting is the one thing which the combine is very good for is getting representatives from every team alongside a bunch of agents in the same place. So it's where a lot of trade talk starts to take shape, just because you have lots of people in the same area. So I think the big thing, I think we start to get some Justin Fields news in about a week's time. I wouldn't be surprised if big news of the week next Monday, we're talking about, it seems like he's heading to Atlanta, or it seems like he's heading to Pittsburgh. But I wanted to ask you now, if you had to predict, where do you think he ends up?
I want to say Atlanta, but I feel like that's the obvious one at the moment, and I think everyone is on board with that. Oh, he's definitely gonna go to Atlanta because they need a quarterback and stuff like this. But I actually really like that Pittsburgh. Why do I really like him at Pittsburgh? I don't know why. I just think I've not really heard that one mentioned, and you've just said it, and I'm just like, whoo, I kind of like that.
Well, I think it's a team that likes to run the ball. We know that Mike Tomlin loved him coming out, so I think they were really interested in him in that draft if he'd have fell to them. And the weapons are pretty good. I mean, Najee Harris has had an up and down career and is kind of hated by the fantasy community, but is still a decent running back. Jalen Warren, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson, Pat Fryermuth, like, the weapons are pretty good. I mean, the weapons in Atlanta are probably better. But I think it could be a really interesting one. The one which no one's really talking about, which I think could be interesting, is actually the Raiders. We have some very needy QB teams. It seems this offseason more than any other, there are lots of teams that could do with a quarterback. And obviously there's probably the three top prospects, and then JJ McCarthy that we know are going to go in the first round. One of Bo Nix and Michael Penix might as well, but it could be four, it could be six. But but we have more QB needy teams than that. But the Raiders went out and hired Luke Getsy as offensive coordinator, who obviously just came from the Bears. The problem with me for that, so to say, obviously there's a connection there. Maybe they got on really well. Maybe that's the reason why. The problem for me with that, even if it is the reason that they've gone well, we don't want to start Aiden O'Connell. Jimmy G's just got suspended for taking PEDs, so we want to go and trade for Justin Fields. Why would you then get members of the Bears staff where he's been up and down, but last season especially pretty terrible, go out and get Luke Getsy to kind of replicate the Bears form of 2022 to 2023 doesn't really seem to make sense to me.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't scream a winning formula, really, does it? You know what I mean?
No.
But quickly, can we just mention the fact that Jimmy G was taking performance enhancing drugs and was still awful? You know what I mean? not even taking performance enhancing drugs helped that guy. It was...
I want to see what it would have been like without them. Like how terrible a quarterback was Jimmy G.
Yeah, but no, I don't think I'd like Justin Fields at Vegas. I don't think I would. I think it's going to be. I genuinely feel like it's going to be Atlanta, and I think they're quite the favourites to do it, aren't they? So
yeah. Well,
I'd like to see him there.
Yeah, I think it'll be really interesting to see. I mean, obviously Drake London and Carl Pitts is one thing, but a backfield of Bijan Robinson and Justin Fields, I think will be really interesting, especially with the new staff that they've hired. So running potentially the Sean McVay scheme, I think could be quite interesting. But let's get on to our main section of the day. So we're reviewing the running backs from 2023. It was a really interesting season at running back. So when we look at points, at just fantasy points, and look at the final finishes, it obviously CMC dominated in such an unbelievable way. He finished with over 100 points in PPR, more than the RB2. So it was a really strange season where we had some kind of breakouts in the later rounds, like Kyron Williams and Raheem Mostert. We had a few busts, a few disappointing players in the early rounds. So Austin Eckler really being the big one. Derrick Henry still finished in the top 10, but it seemed to be quite disappointing. It never felt like a particularly strong season for him. And whereas when you look at, I mean, obviously next week we'll be looking at wide receiver. When you look at the top 12 wide receivers and you're like, oh yeah, I can name, most of the top 10 because they were people kind of really dominating on your team each week. When you look at the top 12 at running back, you're looking at players that you're like, really? He finished in the top 12, really? Joey 6? Like, there were lots of players that didn't feel like they were having that kind of season. And it just generally felt a bit lower overall. It kind of played into, and you touched on this last week, that fantasy football used to be, redraft especially, you start off with either 2 or 3 running backs and then you move on to the wide receivers. And now that seems to have really have flipped. So the wide receiver early approach really seems to be the more likely way of doing things. So I wanted to ask you, before we get on to looking into the top 12 themselves, what's your strategy at the moment for approaching running backs in the draft?
So I kind of said this last week, and I don't want to kind of sit here and repeat myself, but obviously, to me, every draft is different. Every draft is different. Every league you're playing is different, and it's one of them. You've got to take your value. Yes, if I'm drafting dynasty, I want my QBs, I want my wide receivers. I think, to me, it's genuinely elite wide receivers are unreal, absolutely unreal. They pay back the value, and you can have them for a good few years, and they hold that value. And I mentioned this last week as well. QBs, I feel like your QB2s are sneaking into that top 12 a lot more now, and they're people that I can get later on, so I can start my build as wide receiver, and then pick up a couple of QB2s and still be a contending team. Running back is so difficult because I think there are a couple of running backs that I kind of want quite early. You kind of want your Brees Hall, your Bijan Robinson, them type of people, your Jamar Gibbs and stuff like this. They're people I'm quite happy to go for within sort of the first 4 rounds, maybe.
Yeah,
If the value falls, depending on where you're picking, if you're drafting super flex and you're one of the first, like, 5, maybe 6 picks, you're going to go QB. If you're not going to go QB, I wouldn't, I'd look at moving back and somebody can move forward and picking up more draft capital and stuff like that. If you're picking sort of, I don't know, 6 to 9 sort of area, that's when you're talking about, your elite wide receivers and stuff like that. If you're the back end of the draft, then you're in the conversation where you could sort of maybe pick up a wide receiver and maybe that, QB, so you've got one of each. And then if it's a third round reversal, then round 3, you're going, Bijan Robinson or Brees Hall still on the board. Bam. You
yeah.
know what I mean? I'm going to take one. But I think running back, like you were saying, a couple of years ago, you'd have smashed. I'm trying to think of some names. So you've got like David Johnson,
Todd
Ezekiel Elliott,
Gurley.
Todd
Yeah.
Gurley. All of these guys, you were like, bam, bam. You're walking out of a draft and you're going, I've got Todd Gurley and David Johnson. Oh yeah, show me the rings, baby. and it's just now there is no way possible that you're going to start this. You go, even redraft next year. You're not going to go right. Round 1, Christian McCaffrey. Round 2, Brees Hall. You're just not going to do it.
No.
Like, don't get me wrong, both absolutely phenomenal running backs, and you want both of them. But I'd love to know the numbers on this, but I feel like the injuries to running backs are so common now.
Yeah.
That actually you're going, I've taken these 2. One of these gets injured, done.
Yeah.
Absolutely done. And you've put all your eggs in one basket there, whereas wide receiver, I kind of don't feel like you're putting all your eggs in one basket there. And you know what I mean? And I don't know, it's so weird, isn't it? It's so weird. You have to adapt every year. You have to find out what's going to be the big thing that year,
It's why, and we'll come on to this again a little bit later, but in Dynasty, I actually have no problem loading up on the older running backs and basically building my teams around quarterbacks and wide receivers and aiming for youth at those positions. But I'm generally unlikely. I don't think I have any exposures to Bijan or Brees or A Chain. I have a couple of Jameer Gibbs shares and a couple of Kyron.
Shock.
Yeah, obviously. But again, those Kyron shares, I probably took them in the 3rd round of a rookie draft, and it was probably a homer pick. Like, it wasn't me going out and getting that elite running back. I'm much happier going out and loading up my team with Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, Joe Mixon, that sort of player. Like, there's a team I have which won the title last season with well, with a running back core that basically was switching between Alvin Kamara, James Conner, and Aaron Jones, which obviously you wouldn't look at those. I mean, Kamara had a good season, but you wouldn't look at those and think that's a title winning running back core. But obviously, I'd hammered so many wide receivers. That you can make up for it elsewhere. Like, so I've only done one dynasty startup draft this offseason. Obviously, I'm going to do more because I'm a degenerate. But if you look at my approach to the running back position, so again, being a homer, I took Kyron Williams in the 4th, and then I didn't take my next running back until the 9th, and basically just loaded up on those kind of older veterans that have a bit more of a stink to them. So Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift, Alvin Kamara, Antonio Gibson. I actually was the one to take the punt on Austin Eckler in the 14th round because I just think I'm happy to take these players that, yeah, they might only be on my team for a season or 2, but they're likely to contribute while they're there, and no one really wants any shares of them. I just think it's interesting, and I think we're kind of similar that I don't tend to have many shares of the younger running backs because they're just too expensive, but they change so quickly as well. Like I remember in my first ever Dynasty League, um, around season 3 or 4, a guy had been absolutely loading up and like really kind of selling out on rookie picks to get up to the first round, a lot of things. And he went up and he managed to get himself Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, and Najee Harris. And it was Najee's rookie season. And at the end of that season, we were like, oh my God, he's got the top 3 dynasty running backs. And then within a season, you don't want anything to do with 2 of them. And John and JT's on the way out as well. Like there was a time at which none of them were relevant at all. The turnover at the position is so crazy that it's very difficult to evaluate in Dynasty.
Yeah,
Um,
well, sorry. Look at Bijan this year. Bijan came out last year, and everyone was like, "This guy is an unreal prospect." Like, you know what I mean? We're talking this guy is better than sort of Saquon Barkley up there and everything like this. And everyone was like, he's just hitting everything, and he's the top. And then like he has an average year,
yeah,
to sort of say. And now everyone's like, yeah, he's not my dynasty RB1.
yeah.
And I'm like, did I miss something? Did he have talent sucked out of him? I know Arthur Smith is a Dementor, but you know what I mean? It's like that guy's still, and everyone at this time of year when it's combines and drafts and everything like that, everyone's like, do not, don't rank people based on landing spots and stuff like that. And Bijan went to the Falcons, and everyone's like, okay, we don't talk about landing spots. Talent will prevail and everything like this. And then Arthur Smith's his head coach, and nothing goes right for him, and he has an average year, and everyone's like, yeah, he's not my number one now.
Yeah.
And it's just like it blows my mind because sorry, I remember when JT was Dynasty RB1, and mate, I remember I was like, oh, I want JT in my team, and I was approached the guy in one of my leagues, and it was like, I want JT. What do you want for him? He's like 3 firsts. I'm taking nothing
Jesus
but 3
Christ.
firsts, and I'm like, dude, I'm not paying 3 firsts for JT. And he's like, yeah, but he's a Dynasty RB1. 12 months later, I could have got him for like,
Wait a
I don't know,
second.
yeah. And it's just like it's the community is so fickle with people, and
Yeah.
it's and it just blows my mind. Absolutely blows my mind.
It's crazy, isn't it? And I think it's a really interesting thing with Bijan because like people had been talking about his talent for years. I mean, obviously he was the consensus 101 when he came out, but more than that, people had been talking about this guy and being excited for him for seasons in advance. And then the rookie season that he had, like you say, he finished as the RB9. That's pretty good. Like I know we were drafting him as like the RB3 or 4 off the board, but the RB9 overall for a rookie is generally pretty strong. I mean, he didn't finish in the top 12 in fantasy points per game, but people are talking immediately about Bijan as if he's just dead in the water. And this is the guy that people had been, saving 2023 rookie picks for him for years. And then he has like a few duff games with Arthur Smith not using him, and that's it. He's completely dead.
Yeah. So I don't know if you did. I drafted him. I know you've just joined our really awesome league, the Hatchetman League,
Yeah.
and I was the 101 last year, and I took Anthony Richardson, and it was like, you've taken Anthony Richardson over Bijan, like, and we're talking super flex, and it's just
Yeah.
like, what, like, and it's just like, no, I have to, and now everyone's looking back, going, "I don't know, mate." You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is the guy that said Kyle Pitts is average. He knows what he's talking about. You know what I mean? But
And
it's
it's
just, I love the dynasty community. I love it.
it's the mad thing in Superflex that like if we look back at the 2023 rookie drafts now, Bijan is at highest the 103, and I think you can make an argument for the 104 maybe. So you definitely take CJ Stroud over him. You
Yep.
definitely take Anthony Richardson.
Yep.
And I think it's then between probably Puka and Bijan before Bryce Young, or Jameer Gibbs? If you lean that way, he's a lot of people's
So
RB1.
I have a great question about Puka, but I'm going to save that for next week because we're wide receivers. But I have a great question that has actually sparked a conversation in one of my dynasty leagues
Okay.
about this, and my home dynasty league is where the question came from. So it's like this conversation has gone in a couple of leagues. So I got up. Tune in next week to find out the Puka question. Okay, we'll put Ali on the spot next week.
I'm glad because you're hosting next week, so you can make sure that it's in the show sheet. But
Can't wait. I'm going to put it on the show sheet. Paul's special question.
we can have that as a recurring feature for the off season if you want.
Amazing. Love it.
So we've kind of spoken a little bit about like the prevalence of taking running backs a little bit later. And obviously zero RB has been quite a controversial strategy for the last few years in fantasy, really. So obviously making sure that you take running backs later and you hammer the other positions as early as possible. I remember seeing about the huge winners in underdog fantasy. So this again from our friend Tom Strachan, that in the last 2 years, zero RB teams won the regular season prize and on underdog, the grand prize on underdog, and last year the Best Ball Mania regular season prize, which over 3 teams is $4.5 million in prize money. And that's just looking at the regular season champ. Their first running back was James Cook in the 6th. So it's clearly a really strong strategy. And if you look at this year, 6 of the top 12 running backs in PPR were drafted outside the top 5 rounds, including obviously we've touched already on Raheem Mostert and Kyron Williams. What are your thoughts on this as a strategy? I often find that I love the idea of it, but I prefer to have some confidence in one running back. Obviously, if you're drafting running backs late, yes, we talk about Kyron Williams and Raheem Mostert, and you could have taken A Chain, and but you have to nail every single pick. You have to get it spot on. What are your thoughts on zero RB going forwards? Do you think it's something you might look to do?
So I'm a bit of a chicken.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a chicken, and I get to the point where I'm like, I look at the running backs that are on the board, and we all have sort of our own rankings and where we put people and sort of our own values of players, isn't it? And I get to a point where I'm like, that there's a smash running back there right now.
Yeah.
And I could take him. Now, I do feel like, fantasy football, I'm not going to sit here and say fantasy football is all luck, because I don't think it is. I think you have to have a good strategy, you have to have a good plan, and you have to be clever with things. But I also think you need a little bit of luck. Now, I know what you're saying with the underdog and zero RB is that approach and everything like that, and the guy that won it, his first running back was James Cook. Now, to me, how do you feel going into the season as your RB1 is James Cook? This year, not so bad. 12 months ago, you were like, oh, I don't like that one bit.
Yep.
So he's got a little bit of luck on his side. Like you were saying, Raheem Mostert, not Derrick Henry, like Kyron Williams, them sort of players hitting in the top 12. That's a lot of luck. You got to a point where you were like, round what? I think Raheem Mostert was undrafted in some leagues. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He was somebody that you could pick up on the waiver wires, and you've literally struck gold. And there's just that little bit of luck. Now, to me, my strategy would be, I'm happy to wait, but I'm going to get to a point where I go, Alvin Kamara's still sat there.
Yeah.
I know what Alvin Kamara could do. I'm going to take him.
Yeah.
It's, I don't know. I'm just a bit of a chicken, and I do feel so. I could talk about running backs all day, mate. Okay, absolutely all day. Now, I'm going to go down some little rabbit holes in different ways now and stuff like that. So one of the big things I'm going to point out with running backs now is I don't feel like you have that 3 down bell cow running back anymore. I think there's more 1A, 1Bs, or there's a good one or an okay one, a good two, that's sort of just behind, and they're playing a role and they're coming in, and you've not got, I remember a time when Ezekiel Elliott would be on the pitch. I know he's not there, like not as good anymore or anything like that, but he'd be on the pitch 99% of snaps. He'd get the ball 30, 40 times. He'd keep pounding at the defense, and he'd just go, 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 go. And I've seen it with Derrick Henry. I've seen it with all of these players doing it before and everything like that. And you just don't have that now. You look at Miami, you had Mozart, you had Achan, and they're both flying and stuff like this.
Yeah.
And, so I do think that plays a big part in it. But the other way I wanted to go with it is I do think that I'm going to start looking at the running back position like I do the tight end position.
Yeah.
And tight end, you need that elite player. You need an elite tight end. You're gonna be halfway there if you can pick up one of these people. Now, don't get me wrong. There is a big gap between elite and the rest of the tight end, and I don't think there's a big gap like there is that in the running back. But it's going to get to the point where if you've got one of these, if you've got one of them top 12 in your running back position, you're probably in a good position to be somebody that makes the playoffs every year in your league. You know what I mean? If you haven't got one of them in your team, you're probably looking at picking first in your rookie draft.
Yeah. And I think it's a really interesting thing about, and coming back to what you were saying about kind of chickening out of waiting on running backs, and the nature of like the fading away of the bell cow status of the position. And like we say, you come back to, I remember my first ever dynasty pick was David Johnson, and it must have been what, 2016, 2015, 2016, somewhere around there.
Yeah, about there. That's where I
Yeah.
started playing as well.
Took him in the 104, and I remember maybe slightly later, because I can't remember, but I'm pretty confident the 102 was Saquon. I'm pretty confident that it went CMC, Saquon, Zeke, David Johnson, Alvin Kamara. So around that sort of range, like Todd Gurley went at the back of the first. But obviously there were so many bell cows. That was the nature of the position, that you had a player that you absolutely rided. Whereas now,
Saquon didn't come in until 2018. He was
2018.
He
So
was
that might have
drafted in
been
2018.
It might have been a little later then. So maybe it wasn't then. Maybe it was CMC, Zeke,
CMC,
Alvin
Zeke.
Kamara, David Johnson in
Yeah,
like 2017.
I remember my first redraft. We had a keeper league, and I won it within one of the first years because I had Zeke and David Johnson. And they were like my keepers every year. We got to keep two
Yeah.
players every year, and they were my two keepers every year. And then my little brother went and done it, and he had CMC and Saquon.
Yeah.
And it was like, this is just not fit.
And it's mad, isn't it? Because you think about it then, like, if I've got these two elite running backs, I can just keep them forever. But even if you had this year, if you had CMC and Brees, but if someone else had JJ and Amon Ra, or they drafted Puka very late, they got him off waivers, and they're keeping him and CeeDee Lamb, you'd rather have the wide receivers. It's just a change of how it's viewed. But I'd much rather a hero RB strategy these days than a zero RB. So hero RB is basically the same thing, but you take one very early. And it's because the bell cows are so rare these days that the players that you can have confidence will get over 300 touches, which just doesn't happen. Like, even just looking at attempts on the ground, Derrick Henry had one of his lowest years. He had over 400 rushing attempts when he hit his when he was the rushing leader a few seasons ago, but he had 280 on the ground this year. Like, you want to be having over 300 touches. Even CMC only had 359.
Only.
So only. So what I would like to do is take one of those RBs that I have confidence in very high, and then wait until later and hammer the position later on to try and hit those upside picks. Just because we spoke about that team with James Cook in the sixth, Rashad White in the seventh, hitting on Kyron late, hitting on Raheem Mostert late. But for that one team that won millions, there were thousands upon thousands of other teams that drafted, their first pick in the seventh round was Alexander Mattison, and then they drafted all of the, they went Elijah Mitchell because they thought, well, the upside for this team is if CMC gets hurt, and they drafted backups for for players that then never got injured. Like, you have to be so lucky to hit on that it just I just want to come away with my draft having confidence in my team, not going, well, if this happens, then I'll wipe the floor. If these 4 players get injured, then I'm gonna have an elite season. Like, it just doesn't give you any confidence.
No. Which is what I was saying about, like, sort of looking at it the same way as the tight end position. You look at the tight end position, you go, I want your Travis Kelsey, your
Yeah,
Hawkinson, your Mark Andrews, and stuff like that. They're the players at tight end. You go, I have confidence in them. I want them to be there. They're
yeah,
a bit of a cheat code, you know. You look at this now and you go, I kind of want Brees Hall. I want a
yeah,
lot of Brees Hall. You know, I'm going to trust Bijan's got the talent to prevail here, so I want Bijan. You know, and these are people that you can have confidence in. So if that means that I've got to take one of them early, then I'm going to take one of them early.
yeah, absolutely.
Shoot,
So
shoot me.
so let's come on to looking at the top 12. So starting obviously at 1 with CMC, and we'll go through their total points as well. So CMC finished on 391.3 fantasy points. In second, Brees Hall 290.5. You can see, like, that difference is insane. 100 points between 1 and 2. Travis Etienne, RB3, 282.4 points. RB4 was Rashad White, 267.9. RB5, Raheem Mostert, 267.7. RB6, Joe Mixon, 267 flat. RB7, Kyron Williams, 255 points. RB8, Derek Henry, 246.7. Bijan Robinson, 246.3. Jameer Gibbs, 242.1. In at RB11 was Alvin Kamara on 233. And at RB12 was James Cook at 232.7 points. So the gap at the beginning is really stark between CMC and anyone else. And then it's kind of quite clunked together. To note, this is PPR. I think Raheem Mostert's the RB2 if it's just a standard format, but then Brees jumps up with his 95 receptions in 2023. But when you look at that, what running back is kind of the biggest surprise for you in the top 12?
So there's quite a few we could talk about. You know, there's quite a few names that nobody expected to finish in the top 12. Just to name a few: James Cook, didn't expect him to finish in the top 12. Kyron Williams, Raheem Mostert. You know, they're 3 that you know we could sit here and talk about all day. But to me, the one that I really want to talk about that kind of has surprised me on how high he's finished more than anything was Travis Etienne.
Yeah.
I think he's kind of shocked me this year, and I think he shocked a lot of people. That's a really high finish for him. I think he's had a really, really good season, and you know the Jags drafted Tank Bigsby this year, and a lot of people expected him to take some sort of work away from Travis Etienne. I know the latter stage of the season, Etienne's numbers did actually drop off a little bit, and he had a lot of games sort of in the middle where he really sort of dominated. And so I've just tried to get his numbers up, but my phone won't unlock for some reason. There we
Yeah,
go. I've got his numbers. So you know, you sort of look at week 3 through to their bye week in week 9. He had running. He was running back 9, 22, 1, 2, 4, 5.
yeah,
You know, and then after that he came back after his bye 38, 25, 20. Couple of good weeks again, 11 and 14. Then it was 25, 46, and then running back 6 the last week of the season. So you know, he did have that long stretch, and you know, he was running back 1 on week 5 this year with 43.3 points. He had 26 rushes, 136 yards, 2 touchdowns, 4 receptions for 48 yards. You know, he had a stormer of a week that week, but he shocked me with how high he's finished, and that to me is a I suppose Raheem Mostert is the biggest shock.
yeah,
But to me, the fact that ETN has finished the season as RB3 overall, that's quite a big shock to me, and I was quite surprised to see that.
I think the ETN thing is more than anything, it's the way that it felt in the season. So when you see CMC, Brees, Raheem Mostert, Kyron, and I think ETN and Mixon is kind of the same thing here. That I never felt if I had teams with ETN on, which I do have a few shares in Dynasty, I never felt like he was winning me leagues. I never felt like he was someone I'd have confidence in at the running back position as an RB1. So to see him finishing all the way up at RB3 felt quite surprising to me. Um, the one which then the other one which I think is the biggest surprise, and this is slightly different because obviously for ETN it was seeing them there now based off the way that it felt during the season. But this is kind of based off the preseason rankings, and that's Alvin Kamara. So they drafted Kendre Miller in the 3rd round. Alvin Kamara was suspended at the beginning of the season. He actually only played 11 games. So he was drafted. I was just looking up the ADP on Fantasy Pros, which didn't seem right to me to say he was drafted as the RB18 because I definitely saw him going much later because people were scared of him. But he finishes the RB3 in points per game. So I just think he was an interesting one that everyone was so frightened of, going into, getting older. So he turned 28 during the season, suspended at the beginning of the year. They've brought in Jamal Williams. They've brought in Kendre Miller. Like, we're really worried about Alvin Kamara. And then he just came out and dominated. He was getting something silly in terms of his receptions, especially down the stretch. That he was kind of averaging about 8 or 9 targets a game. He had one game he finished on 31 PPR points without scoring a touchdown, because he
Insane.
recorded 12 receptions for 91 yards. Like, for Alvin Kamara, like, we knew that he could do that, but because he's older and because of the suspension, people were quite worried about him.
I just want to point out here. So I was just looking at last year's PPR points and finishes. So last year, Alvin Kamara with 233 points would have still finished as the RB12. Okay. But ETN with 282 points would have finished as RB7.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it just shows, like, this year 282 points has actually finished you as the RB3. 290 points would have finished Brees Hall as the RB5. And last year the top 4 were all over 300 points.
Yeah, and it just always felt like a much lower year at the running back position. Basically, if you didn't have CMC, and that's kind of reflected in points per game as well. So just to give like a brief summary, and the points per game top 12 is a little bit different. So you've got CMC on 24.5, Kyron on 21.3, Alvin Kamara at 17.9, and then basically Mostert and Achan at 17.8 and 17.3, and then it starts to drop off for the rest of the list. But that gap between CMC to Kyron's 3 points, and then it's another 3.5 points all the way down to Kamara. So I think in terms of like points per game, you could really tell the difference between this year and different years. But let's come back to the top 12. Was there any running back? I don't want to make this a big Austin Eckler conversation because I feel like we've done a lot of the Austin Eckler conversation about how disappointing he was, especially when we did our awards show. But what running back was there to you that finished lower than expected in 2023?
So, Austin Eckler is the easy conversation. So I'm going to go sort of a different route with this. I'm going to go for a couple of people that were a bit lower than Austin Eckler and not somebody that we were going to take sort of the first round. And I'm going to mention a couple of names of people that everyone were like, oh, now's the time to shine. They were both backups. They were both backups, and when they came in and stepped into that role, they looked like phenomenal things, and they both got the role this year. And I don't think either one sort of did what anyone expected or everyone wanted them to do more than anything. So the two players I'm thinking of is Alexander Mattison, who finished as the RB. Let me just make sure I've got it on PPR. I have got it on PPR. Alexander Mattison finishes the RB 38 on the season and Tony Pollard was the RB14. So that was not too bad, but
It's
it was
higher
not.
than you think, isn't it?
Everyone expected him. They were like, "Oh my god, he exploded when Zeke was out and everything like this," and he's now got that role to himself. And everyone was quite high on him. I haven't what he actually went as.
He was the RB5.
Yeah, so you've drafted him as what about Alexander Mattison? You've drafted Tony Pollard as RB5 and he finishes RB14. So
Matson, according to this, was the RB25, but I definitely saw him go as high as kind of the third or fourth round.
yeah, so but then 25, you've drafted him as the RB25 and he's finished as the RB38. So
Yeah,
to me, they're just they're just a couple of people that I was maybe a little bit bullish on and I wanted, and I fell for it myself. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I knew all along that they were going to be crap. I went for these players myself. I had these players in certain places, and yeah, I just think they both had their opportunity, and neither one are gonna get that opportunity again like that. They had their chance.
yeah. And I think it's a really interesting thing when you look at the players that came from being backups that everyone was very excited about for years, when they finally get that role, that it doesn't quite work out in the same way. The player that I was really interested in terms of underperformance was Miles Sanders, and that he was a player, excuse me, that I was actually really in on. I quite like the talent. He was being drafted as the RB20, so towards the fourth or fifth round, and he lost his job very early on in the season. Lost his job to Chuba Hubbard. So Chuba finished as the RB27, and Miles Sanders, you can tell by how far around to scroll, was the RB52. So it was really disappointing for him. But that was someone that I looked at and thought, that's someone that I think is going to have a real chance to kind of break out in being a bell cow in the offense. I thought the offensive line was all right, but really disappointed.
Can I ask you a question?
Of course,
So while Miles Sanders was at the Eagles and stuff like that, how many times did you draft Miles Sanders?
probably quite a lot. I think I had a fair amount of him when he was at Philadelphia, but I think I probably in redraft took him more in Carolina.
Okay, so what you're saying is you didn't learn your lesson.
Yeah, I'm
because
dumb.
because
I'm
the
dumb is
people
what I'm saying.
the people that didn't draft Miles Sanders this year are the people that have been burnt by Miles Sanders before.
Yeah.
So what we'll do, I'm going to set a reminder on my phone 12 months from now to ask you
How much Miles
if you
Sanders did I
if
draft?
you learned your lesson. and when he ends up at a different team, you're like, ooh, he's there. Oh, he could actually be really good. I'm going to draft loads of Miles Sanders and smash him in round 15 or 16 of every draft.
Let's move on. I don't want to talk about Miles Sanders anymore.
Ah,
Is there anyone, and this is just looking towards next year as well, is there anyone that you think could be in the top 12 next season who missed the cut next year? To know, I did a little bit of research into the how with people who finish as RB2, so obviously 13 to 24 range, how often they break into the top 12 next year. And across the last 4 seasons, actually only 12 of the 48 players who finished as that range went on to become a top 12 option the next year. So that's 12.5%. So I think it's quite interesting looking at that trend of it's actually very unlikely to happen. But who do you think potentially could break in next season?
so I think there's a couple of names. I think there's one name that's a bit of a cheat, if I'm honest, and that's Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah.
He missed quite a few games, so I don't want to sit here and go, oh, Jonathan Taylor could make it in the top 12. He's got the talent to make it in the top 12. I think again, Ezekiel Elliott, I think that maybe not Ezekiel Elliott. We're talking about Saquon Barkley. Sorry, that's what I was thinking. Like, I think he again, he finishes the RB13 this year. He missed a couple of games himself this year. Again, if he'd have played them 3 games, he was in the top 12. But I'm going to pick a name that I'm just going to be like, I think he's going to do it. Isaiah Pacheco.
Yeah, I like it.
I think he takes another step forward this year, and I think he really grasps that Kansas City like running back room and gets on board with everything. And yeah, I really think he takes a step into the top 12 this year.
It'll be really interesting to see what they do at running back this offseason, because obviously they have more needs elsewhere. Obviously at the wide receiver position, but also on defense with Chris Jones and L'Jarius Sneed as free agents. But obviously Clyde is a free agent. Jerick McKinnon is a free agent and is getting older. So it'll be interesting to see what they do, but I like Pacheco. The one I wanted to talk about was Tyjae Spears. Obviously, was incredibly efficient this last season. He finishes the RB34, but we did well on limited touches. And now new offensive staff, so less kind of just give it to Derrick Henry 400 times a season. And obviously Derrick Henry's a free agent. So Tyjae Spears is quite an interesting one. The player I wanted to talk about as well, and this comes from the article on the website. So I looked into the last 4 years of running back data, especially looking at the percentage of fantasy points that you had from touchdowns. And Devon Achan was obviously hugely efficient when he was playing. So finished as the RB5 in points per game. But if you look at the way he scored his points, so 2 main things that were quite worrying for me. So he scored 34.6% of his fantasy points from touchdowns. And you were actually 15% more likely to repeat as a top 24 option if you had less than 20% of your fantasy points from touchdowns than if you had more than 30. So basically, the players who were less touchdown reliant were more likely to repeat as an RB an RB2, a top 24 option the next year. Also, so we averaged 2.25 across that span. You average 2.25 rookies per season finishing as a top 24 option. And basically, aside from one, you repeat if you finish with over 200 plus PPR points as a rookie. That was every single other option, so 8 out of 9. And of the 3 rookies, or the 3 rookies to finish in the top 24 this season, Achan was the only one to finish under 200 points. So I think it's a really interesting thing with him that like the reliance of how he got his fantasy points could be quite interesting for next year. Like he'll be drafted really high, but he was incredibly efficient on very few touches. And if the touchdowns go away, I think it could be quite difficult for him. Is there anything else you wanted to say, only with a couple of minutes left, about the RB position and what you learned from 2023 that you want to take forward?
So I think you can learn something new every year. Okay, you can learn from the previous year, and I think that's the whole sort of idea behind these shows and these reviews and everything like that, and what we're trying to do. So to me, like what I've learned is not to be scared of the running back position, and these talented running backs are super talented, and you need to get a good running back in your team, or you have to be extremely lucky.
Yeah.
So we've brought this up quite a few times tonight and everything like that. That team that won the underdog thing, he got very lucky with James Cook.
Yeah.
Like you said, thousands of people went for this guy or that guy or that guy or that guy or that guy. You could be the guy that goes, oh yeah, I got, I hit with Isaiah Pacheco and nailed it.
Yeah.
But I want to be the guy with CMC.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to be the guy that's got Breece Hall. I want to be the guy that's got Bijan Robinson in my team, because I think he's, we see Bijan for what he is next year,
yeah,
and the beast that he can be. And don't be scared. I know everything is all about this zero arbitrary approach and everything like that. But if everyone in your league, you're drafted in a league now with 11 other people, and 12 you go, I'm going zero RB.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you're in a position where you're going, am I reaching on wide receivers here? Or am I smashing the talent at running back?
Yeah.
So if you're going to take my advice, go with the board. If everyone's going zero RB, maybe sneak yourself a CMC in there. Unless you're drafting with me in like a charity event, then just leave me all the best players.
Well, there you have it. Paul's advice: let him draft good players and draft CMC. And just to touch on quickly before we close, that when you look at that top 12 in points per game, so the difference between CMC as the RB1 in points per game and Jonathan Taylor as the RB12 in points per game, so all finished as RB1s, was 9 points. Like, you're getting a 9-point per game advantage having CMC over JT there. So I think it's interesting that we started off by talking about how we don't particularly like the position, but actually getting those elite guys in can be a huge league winner. So yeah, they have it. Draft CMC next year.
What? Listen, what was your takeaway? What did you learn from the running back position? Because you've asked me like you've put me on the spot. What did you learn? Come on, tell the listeners what you learned. Give your secrets away. I know what you do. You get everyone else to share their secrets. Keep yours, and then go. I'm going to win.
Rams players. Rams players is my secret.
Oh, okay. Thanks, guys. Tune in next week.
I think a big thing for me is narrative in drafting teams. So I think it's about looking into, if you're going to try and hit on those later picks, what's the narrative of why they're going to hit? And what are you actually finding out more so about either the efficiency of the player or the story of them on their team that means that they're more likely to hit than someone else? So compare this between someone like Jerome Ford and someone like Kyron Williams or Raheem Mostert. So I actually, and again, this not trying to humble brag, like Raheem Mostert, I drafted almost everywhere because his cost was just obviously way too low for the way the Dolphins were using him in the season before. And we knew that he was going to be incredibly efficient. And yeah, he was probably going to get injured, and he did get injured. But in that running scheme, he's a perfect fit. It's why he broke out in San Francisco as well. Jerome Ford obviously performed pretty well, but that only happened because Nick Chubb tore his ACL. And Jerome Ford and Raheem Mostert were going around the same place. The same with Kyron Williams, that we knew the Rams had tried to trade Cam Akers. They considered cutting Cam Akers. We knew that Sean McVay didn't hugely like him. So taking a punt on, Cam Akers going in the kind of the fourth round, Kyron Williams going undrafted in some leagues, we'll take a punt on that because there's a chance that that running back takes over the backfield. And there are some cases where, every year running backs are going to get injured and their backups are going to be league winners. And we know that's going to happen. But there are plenty of running backs you can find later on. It's not just about going, I'm going to take, Elijah Mitchell. I'm going to take whoever Israel Abanikanda, who's the backup to Breece Hall. I'm going to take Tank Bigsby as the backup to Travis Etienne. Like, it's a case of going, well, where are there narratives that I can find to see why these later drafted players could have upside to not just take over the job if there's an injury, but actually win the job on their own. I think it'll be an interesting. I think I wouldn't want to make a prediction on it just yet because obviously running back depth charts are going to shake out so much in the next few months with the draft and with free agency. It's such a huge free agency pool, but I think it'll be interesting to look through and go, where are there narratives you can find to see why a player is going to break out?
Yeah, and do you know what, mate? We've been through a whole running back episode, and we haven't even mentioned that Josh Jacobs, Saquon Barkley, and who's the third name? Not one of them are getting franchise tagged, so they're all going to be free agents.
Yeah. Tony Pollard was franchise
Tony
tag last
Pollard,
year.
that's the other one. So
Yeah.
we've been through a whole. We've spoke for an hour and 4 minutes, and we haven't even brought up that big news that neither one of them are going to get a franchise tag, and
Yeah.
they could all be on the free agent market. And so yeah, so I was going to make you make a prediction, but I do feel that's pretty mad,
Yeah.
pretty bad of me to do that. Sorry.
It's going to be a very interesting off-season at the running back position. And with that, we will finish off for today. So thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe and follow us on X at Wildcard Rewind. Head on over to our YouTube channel, search for us at Fancy Wildcard, and make sure you give us a subscribe. And we will see you next week, where we'll be talking about the wide receivers and how they finished in 2023. Take care.